curtain falls when the lights grow dim, but the dark remembers all of him. Ashes of a gentleman scattered in the rain. Every victory carved from pain. No crown, no throne, no one to blame. Just smoke and the echo of my name. Ashes of a gentleman carried by the wind. The story ends where it begins. Raise your glass, my time has come. Play one last song, then I'm done. I build my own prayer on broken ground with silence.
So, Tyler, tell everybody who you are and where you're from, bud.
All right, as Caleb said, my name's Tyler Crick. I'm a paramedic here with Muhlenberg County EMS. I've lived in Muhlenberg County my entire life. Born and raised in Bremen, lived there for about 15 years. Moved up to Central City, been here pretty much ever since.
So, you're a paramedic.
Yep.
So this is the first, besides Malcolm, but Malcolm's been a little bit of everything. So, but this is the first true EMS guy I've had.
Okay.
So I'm pretty excited about this one. So before EMS, before you became paramedic, EMT, all that, what'd you do before?
I was a union carpenter for 9 years. I done pretty much anything from concrete forms to drywall. Was out here at TVA for about 4 years, doing concrete work out here, a little bit of drywall when they had some of their buildings coming in.
On the gas plant, or
I was on the gas and the coal plant.
Oh,
I
okay.
got the privilege of working on both of those. I was actually at the plant when they decided to shut it down. We were out there building the gypsum plant and the water treatment plant when they decided to shut it down.
So what made you go union wise? What made you get into that?
So fresh out of school, I ended up working for a couple of non-union companies. The union kept trying to get me to come over there. Those non-union companies were paying a little bit better. The benefits wasn't as good, but the pay was just a little bit better. Then ended up, they talked me into coming over, and I was, at that time, back when I got in, I was actually the youngest journeyman carpenter in the union at that time. A lot of times,
Wow.
a lot of times, when you come in, you got to go through a 4-year apprenticeship program unless you have plenty of experience, and that was hard for a lot of people to grasp because here I am, 20 years old, a journeyman carpenter, and a lot of these older guys, they wasn't a big fan of it. But when I do something, it's not one of those things where I just want to halfway do it. I want to be proficient in whatever I do.
Yeah.
And so when I went to actually go in to the union, we're going to have to start you off as a second-year apprentice. I said, I can't do that. I said, as far as pay and going to school and all this other stuff, I said, I just can't do it. And they told me that it was one of those things that I just had to. And I said, well, put me on a job. Let me work for a couple months. I said, if I can pass the test, I said, put me in as a journeyman. He said, I'll do that, but you're not going to be able to pass it. A month later, he talked to the guy that I was working with on the job, and he said, I have no issues with him coming in as a journeyman. He said he knows a whole lot more than some of the guys that I have on the job. And it's just because I was always paired up with those older guys.
Oh, yeah.
On these
the old heads.
Yeah. I was about to say, I wanted to be good at what I did.
Yeah.
So I instead of everybody partnering up with their buddies and everything else, I'm working with the guy that can barely move because, he's done it for the last 60 years,
yeah.
But he taught me a lot. And I was very fortunate in that. So I stuck with it for a long time, and I enjoyed it, and I still do, miss going to some of the jobs, but it's just not one of those things that I wanted to do for the rest of my life.
Yeah. So what is the steps to become journeyman? I know you said something about apprenticeship journeyman. I don't know how that works.
So they have an apprenticeship program where you work and you go through school at the same time. They have a training center. They have one in Evansville because the union I was out of was Indiana, Kentucky, Ohio. So you'll work 3 weeks out of the month, and then you'll go to school for a week. They pay you the entire time that you're in school. And while you're doing that, you learn everything from ceiling grid, concrete formwork, drywall, anything to do with construction.
Yeah.
And you do that for 4. You start out as, a year 1 apprentice all the way up to a 4-year apprenticeship. And how much knowledge and how long you've been on the job is usually what year you go in. So where I had 2 years experience before I even joined, that's why they wanted to throw me in as a second year apprentice. And they have a training center. I was fortunate enough to go out there twice to Vegas. I'd say fortunate.
that's
It was
pretty
also, great time.
I guess.
You just got to be careful out there.
Yeah, we'll just leave that part out.
Yeah. But Vegas was great. A lot of great guys. You meet guys from all over the world. New York, especially those we don't have a big union presence here. Up north, you got a big union presence. Almost every job up there is union. And I mean, I've heard the stories of where if a non-union company comes in, they don't have vehicles left anymore.
Yeah.
They don't have
They put them out quick.
Yeah, they don't last very long up there. So it was a journey, to say the least.
Yeah. So what's the test look like? Is it just like a written test, or is it like a
So they
skills?
have a written test, and if you test out and you do pass the written test, they still want you to go on to the job and prove that it's not all in your head. Because anybody can study for the test and go in there and pass it. But getting it down to your fingertips it's a different story. And I was a little nervous on that because, man, my bread and butter was drywall. That's what I'd always done. I'd hang and finish drywall.
God, I hate it.
I love it. It was
I can never get it smooth.
Yeah.
Like I was saying it, off and remud it.
Yeah, it's definitely a finesse. You've
for
got
sure.
it, and it's a love-hate thing. And when I remember I was 18 years old, making $32 an hour on Western's campus.
Oh, dang.
And I didn't like finishing drywall at the time. I could do it. I just wasn't one of those things that I'd much rather hang it and leave it. Because once I hang it, somebody else comes in and finishes it. And there was days I wanted to walk off, and I was like, man, I can't leave this. I said, I'm making $32 an hour.
Oh, yeah.
I said, it's not one of
At
those things.
18?
Yeah.
Dude, that's stupid money.
And that's funny how we talk about that now, because when I was in school, I'd always been interested in medicine and doing EMS or something, I'd even looked at the Fireside, and I'd always wanted to do something like that. And I remember working on Western's campus. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to go get my EMT. And I remember calling Troy and talking to him. He's like, oh, yeah. He said, you get your EMT. We can hire you. He said, I think we start off at $8.50 an hour. I was like, $8.50? And he said, yeah. I was like, all right, well, you have a nice day. And that's as far as that conversation went.
Thanks, no thanks.
Yeah. I just couldn't. I could understand taking a little bit of a pay cut, but I was like, 18, making $32 an hour.
Yeah.
I was like, I'm going to stick with this for a little bit. And it did. It got addicting. I got addicted to the money. So it was just one of those things.
Yeah. Man. Yeah, I bet that was a culture shock.
Oh, for sure. 100%.
God. So what did you do in Vegas? I guess nothing but study and go to...
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
I can
It was.
tell, right?
We had this training for about 4 hours a day, and then I just went back to my room and slept all night.
That's what I'd say.
Especially when you go out there and you're with a bunch of guys in the same mindset. And there's women. There's women out there too. There's been women I've worked on job sites that when they show up, I'm like, oh yeah, they're here. Most of the time when a woman shows up on a construction site, you're like, oh, yeah, she's going to, flaunt herself a little bit. You're going to pick up the extra work, and that's just how Now, there's some of them that's worked me in the dirt that makes me look like, I was out there with a lot of them. But we would go to class for about 4 hours a day, and then you're out there with about 250, 300 other people that's kind of similar to you, but from every walk of life. We had people from Canada, every state in the lower 48. I mean, even people from Alaska. And when you get that many people together and you go out into Vegas, it's just
it's gonna be a good time.
That last time I went, there was a couple of them that ended up going to jail or almost going to jail. We packed several of them back, but yeah, it was definitely a good time.
Oh yeah. Well, we'll leave that there. We'll keep that for when we stop recording. Yeah. So, you like hunting?
Oh yeah.
I know you're a big hunter. I know you and John go hunting and fishing and stuff all the time.
Yep.
So what made you get into hunting?
It's one of those things that I grew up hunting and fishing. That's my grandpa. I remember my grandpa always taking me rabbit hunting. He was never a deer hunter or anything like that. But I remember 5, 6 years old, he had me out there. We would, run behind the dogs, stuff like that. And my dad, he took me deer hunting some, and I really didn't get into deer hunting until I was a little bit older, and I started going with my dad and some of his friends, and that's what really pushed me over the edge to like, okay, it's not something you can go out. A lot of people do, but a lot of people go out there, they'll either have luck or they won't. But it's one of those things that was a challenge again to me, and that's something that's always drawn me to a lot of things that I do is the challenge of it.
Yeah.
I can't go out there anymore and just enjoy hunting because I've got to figure out why something's going the way it is. Yeah. And at 12 years old, here I am out there in the woods by myself trying to figure out stuff, and sometimes it worked out for me, sometimes it didn't. But it also kept me out of trouble.
Yeah.
I was very notorious for doing things that I shouldn't, even from a young age.
Yeah.
I would end up in places I shouldn't be in. And with hunting, it kind of kept me away from everybody else. It kind of was one of those things that my grandparents are the ones that raised me. So they would feel comfortable. I can't even fathom thinking about sending my son out there at 7 years old now. But at 9 years old, 10 years old, here I am walking through the woods behind my house in Bremen. Yeah. No supervision with a gun, a bow, not even, grandparents didn't even think twice about it. Yeah. They trusted me enough to go out there.
And that's the crazy part too, is because that's why kids are soft now.
Exactly.
And I mean, can you imagine our parents' generation? Like, they were worse than Dad and them smoking cigarettes in 4th grade.
Yep.
You know what I mean? Raising hell.
So hunting kind of kept me out of all that other stuff. And it's just something that I grew to love and enjoy getting out there, and kind of got that peace, that little bit of peace and freedom. So that's what got me into it.
Yeah. Well, I've been deer hunting 3 times in my life. And I froze to death and never seen nothing. And I was like, this ain't for me. Now, rabbit hunting and stuff, I like that.
Yeah.
I like staying moving. But I got ADHD like crazy.
Oh, I'm the same way. And I think that's what really, when I'm deer hunting, I'll be sitting out there. And like you said, ADHD, it's my biggest downfall. Because when I'm sitting out there, I'm like, well, why is this deer coming this way? Mm-hmm. Why is he doing it on this day? Why is he coming out at this time of day, but not this time of day? Yeah. And then I start trying to analyze all the pictures I've had of this deer, or why he's doing what he's doing. And it used to be really enjoyable. And now when I get out there, I'm like, oh, man, it's just better if I just go ahead and just jump out of the stand. Just go ahead, just go ahead. I was I'm just overthinking it now. Yeah. Like, I still enjoy it, still love it, but I've turned it almost into a science.
Yeah.
And some would say that's a good thing, but it's not. It's not one of those things you can just go out there and sit and enjoy anymore. Yeah, you're always trying to figure out why they're doing what they're doing.
Yeah, I think it's a good thing if you're like maybe trophy hunting or like competing or something. But if you're just trying to relieve some stress, no, man, that puts more on you.
Yep, 110%.
So what got you into EMS in the first place? I know you went from journeyman to EMT. So what caused that?
So I remember back in school, like I said, when I was in school, it's something I always wanted to get into. Mm-hmm. And I remember watching a documentary when I was in high school, and it was about the Air Force. Mm-hmm. And it was their pararescue. And for anybody that don't know anything about it is their tier. I mean, it is top tier. I don't think the Air Force has many tier 1 units. I don't think they have anything except pararescue, actually.
Yeah, I think that's like their special force. Yeah.
Yes. So I watched them. I was like, man, those dudes they're legit. And I was like, here they are, just diving into the worst of the worst. Saving lives. That's all they do. They go behind enemy lines to pick up people that nobody else can get to.
Yeah.
And they're making a difference out there. I was like, I don't want to go into the air. Well, first of all, I wanted to. I can't swim. A lot of people don't know this. I can't swim. Oh,
really?
Yeah. So the criteria to get in already, you have to go through SEER and all this other stuff. I was like, man, I can't swim. There's no way that I'm going to be able to go out there and even come close to passing what I need to. And the thing about it is, if you apply for that, like if you go and you test out for the ASVAB, all this other stuff, and you go and try out to be pararescue and you fail out, the Air Force sticks you in whatever. You have to sign a contract, and they stick you wherever they want to stick you. So they're going to put you in a job that nobody else wants, that they have a hard time feeling. And I was like, I know I can't pass. Like, I'm not, I'm not too much of a man to admit that I know that I'm going to get out there and drown. Like, this is what's going to happen. Yeah. Not only is the physical part rough, which was going to be a job in itself, but the swimming, I'm done. Like, I can't do it. Yeah, the whole zip tying your hands behind your back and your feet together and kicking you off in 30 foot of water. No, that's it for me. Like, they're going to have to bring me back. Like, I know what's going to happen.
Come up coughing water.
Yeah, exactly. So I was like, the EMS side of things is a whole lot better, easier to get into. So I'm just going to do that. But like I said, I got out of school, got into my whole family. That's all they've ever done is construction. So I got into that, was just kind of, going to get into EMS after, because I could work and go through, EMT school or whatever I needed to and still make money. I just couldn't graduate and then not make money. Yeah. So my plan was to get into construction, work and go to school. I kept that plan for about 6 months until I talked to Troy and found out that, hey, I went from making $32 an hour to now here's your $8.50 an hour. And that kind of got crushed for a little bit. Yeah. I just kind of put it on the back burner. I still wanted to do it, but I just couldn't. Yeah, couldn't change my whole life
at this point.
Yeah. At this time, I just couldn't. I couldn't do it. But the fire's always been there. It's been something that's intrigued me. So that's really what set the whole, the whole thing for it.
So you talked to me before about the Bremen tornado.
Yeah.
That was a big push for you to go ahead and go do it.
Yeah. So the night of the tornado, I was in a friend's basement that night. I had no idea that the tornado in Central City had even hit. So after I was probably asleep. I'm old. I go to bed at 8:30, 9 o'clock at night.
Me too, dude.
Yeah.
I get up at 4 o'clock every morning. Yeah.
Yeah, but I remember my phone kept going off, and I finally answered it, and somebody was like, "Hey, man, are you doing anything right now?" Because they knew I grew up. Almost everybody that I talked to knows I grew up in Bremen. Yeah. And I still have very close ties to a lot of people down in the Bremen area and everything else. And they started calling. They were like, man, is there any way you can come down here? And I was like, what's going on? They're like, you not watched the news, heard anything? I was like, no. I was like, I'm asleep. And they're like, well, the massive tornado just took out Bremen. I was like, whatever. Because it was one of my buddies that he messes with me all the time. He's like, no, he said, I'm serious. He's like, there's people trapped down here. He said, you can't get anywhere. He said, unless it's on foot right now. He said, there's a lot of things going on down here. I was like, man, I'll get up and come down that way. But I still could have never imagined how bad it actually was.
Oh, yeah.
And driving into Bremen that night, I remember seeing everybody out there. And I ended up meeting him at the fire department. And I remember going up there to the sheriff. And my buddy was like, hey, he grew up in Bremen. He's going to go out with us. And he said, I need people that's familiar with the Bremen area. He said, because I've got a lot of people here willing to help. They're just not familiar with Bremen. I said, grew up here. I said, I ran these streets. I said, got in a lot of trouble in these streets. Yeah. I said, so I know the area. He's like, well, do you know where Mayapple is? I was like, yeah. He said, go there. I thought I knew Bremen.
Yeah.
That night when I got out there and everybody's like, where are we at? And I said, we're in Bremen. I said, that's about all I can tell you. I said, because nothing looks the same. Yeah. And I got to work with a lot of great people that night. I got to work with people from the Fireside, just a lot of first responders. And I remember EMS coming in. They were very limited that night. They couldn't get anywhere. So a lot of times you were packing people out to meet them. You were loading them in the back of side-by-sides, farm equipment, anything and everything you could use you were doing that night. And I got to experience what I'd never been able to experience before. And that was a lot of people that had the same goal, helping each other. Yeah. And I remember EMS coming and getting them, and they started, we would bandage them up a little bit. And at that time, I knew just enough to be dangerous. Like, if you're bleeding, try to stop the bleeding. Yeah. Other than that, that's about it. Yeah. And I remember, we would bandage some of the people up, get them to the back of the truck, and they would start working on them. And I was like, man, it just intrigued me. Like, seeing somebody out there. Cool. Yeah. Because a lot of people think that, care don't start until you get into a hospital. They don't see what y'all do, on the side of the road, before EMS gets there, on how, the fire, like, once y'all make contact with that patient, if they're bleeding, y'all go ahead and start addressing that issue.
Yeah, care started.
Yeah, it's not, hey, I know you're bleeding out right now, but we can't do anything until you get to the hospital. Yeah. And that's what, a lot of people don't understand. So I got to witness it that night, how EMS started intervening on these patients that couldn't wait. And I couldn't stand around and watch and really get, involved in it. But being out there in the chaos, seeing everything that unfolded and how everybody worked together when everybody else was falling apart, I said, this is something I want to do. I said, it finally lit that fire again enough. Like, it's not about the money. Don't get me wrong. You got to make money and live, but there's more to it than that. There's a whole network of things that go on that a lot of people don't see. And I got to experience it that night. Yeah. And that really changed my mind and lit that fire again for me.
Yeah, that's pretty cool too, because I don't know, I've been doing it for so long now, I've kind of forgot what that looks like. Yeah. Like to somebody that's not in it. You know what I mean? Like, it's just, we got a job to do, and luckily we all work really well together. Us, EMS, police, everybody. There's no, I don't know, king of the castle with us, with any of us.
And a lot of those larger departments, you start getting that. And that's what I love about the small town, the rural communities, is, if you go to these big cities, man, there's so much fighting between them, because somebody's always got to be better than the other. It's not a big joint effort. It's at that point, it's almost like they're competing for, who's the best. Yeah. And I've heard that from a lot of the cities that I've been to. And they don't work together like they do in a rural community. A rural community, EMS, without fire, we couldn't do our job. Yeah. I mean, it's one of those things that we rely very heavily on our fire departments and stuff like that. And we can tell, like, on those busy days when we don't have the resources available, you can definitely tell that you don't have the assets that you normally have.
Yeah. Yeah. So what's the first thing you noticed going to, well, no, I'll go back here for a second. I'm getting ahead of myself. So when did you, after you made the decision you were going to do it, when did you get into EMT school work?
So right after the tornado, I started looking at all of my options on how to get into school. And I didn't even want to go to high school, let alone go back to college and all this other stuff. So it was one of those things I started looking at. Hopkinsville, their community college was, I think they were about 4 months out from putting on an EMT class. Yeah. And I think it was a 6-month class or something like that. I can't remember exactly how long it was. But I went in there, done all my stuff, got accepted into the program. The day I got accepted into the program, I was just scrolling through Facebook, had typed in something about Hopkinsville's EMT program. Was just trying, before I do anything, I do a lot of research, and then I try to research stuff all the way up until it, and even after I start something. And there was something for ComCare EMS that popped up. And it was like, get paid to get your EMT certification, this internship, this
That's
big
post.
Sweet. Yeah. And I was like, man, what is this? I said, ComCare. I was like, I've never heard of them. I said, it's probably off in Uganda or somewhere like that. Yeah. I said, there's no telling where it's at. And I click on it, and it's Ohio County. I was like, that's a whole lot closer than Hopkinsville. And I said, and I get paid to do it.
Oh, yeah.
So I started going through them, and you had to apply. And there was a bunch of people that applied for it. I found that out after the fact. But they were only taking, I think it was 10 people is what they were taking. So I put my application in that. They ended up calling me a couple of hours after I put it in. I wasn't expecting it at all. And it was Jim Duke's daughter that actually called me. And she had some questions. She said, what makes you want to become an EMT? And I explained the whole tornado situation. Was like, I've always wanted to do this. I said, it's just finally that fire's been lit back inside of me now. I said, I want to pursue this now. Like, I'm serious about it. And her biggest hesitation, I remember her very next question. Where are you from? I was like, Muhlenberg County. She said, Troy Walker? I was like, yeah. And she was like, well, that's our only issue. And I said, well, what's that? And she said, well, if we train you, is there going to be any loyalty to us? Or as soon as we get you trained, you got to go to Muhlenberg County? And I said, no. I said, as long as you treat me right, I said, I'll always be there. I said, even if it's on down the road, I'm not full-time, or which at that time I didn't know anything about full-time PRNs and how often they worked and all that stuff. But I said, as long as y'all treat me right, I said, I'm always there. I said, unless there's just some life circumstance that I just can't be anymore. And she's like, well, we'd like to bring you in and talk to you. And that was their biggest hesitation, is they really thought, they were like, oh, we're going to get him as EMT, and he's going to come down here and work for Troy, and all of our work's for nothing. Yeah. So I come in, and I remember sitting in there with Jim Duke, and her name was Caitlin, that's his daughter. We're sitting in there talking, and Jim's like, so explain to me why you want to be an EMT. And I told him, I said, it's just, and I didn't know there was even a difference between EMT and paramedic at this time. This is how green I was. I really didn't know there was a difference.
Yeah.
And I remember sitting in there and talking to him, and he said, so you want to be a paramedic? And I was like, a what? And he was, I was like, I told him, I said, I thought everybody was an EMT. I said, I thought we just all did the same job. He said, oh no. He said, there's a big difference. I said,
yeah, everybody's ambulance drivers.
Yeah, everybody's an ambulance driver. And he started explaining that, and I was like, well, I mean, yeah. I said, it sounds interesting. I said, but I just want to focus on my EMT right now. He said, well, I'm about to put on a program. He said, how it works. We all make jokes about the ambulance drivers. That's really what I started out doing.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So he told me, he was like, the way it works is you're going to start off in an EMR program. And I said, what's that? Because I just found out what an EMT was.
Yeah.
And he said, well, what it is he said, you've got your basic certifications, and you can drive the ambulance. He said, to drive an ambulance, you have to be at least CPR certified and meet some of the other requirements. And he said, EMRs meet that requirement. He said, it's just, we'll put you through that class, get you your EMR, and then we start on the EMT side of things. I said, great. I said, when can I start? And he said, well, the program starts next week. And I was like,
hell yeah.
I was excited about it,
Yeah,
but I was like,
gosh.
I was like, because I'm still working, doing construction, making probably the best money of my life.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm like, oh, this is a shell shock. But I was like, the classes are at night, and then I can work at night. I said, I can make this work. So we started the EMR program, ended up getting my EMR, and then that's when everything started rolling over into the EMT side of things. And the class, I'm trying to think, anything that I tell you is going to be a lie because I can't remember exactly how long the EMT class took over there. But I got to actually work on the truck the entire time I'm getting my EMT, which was very helpful.
Oh, yeah, that's pretty cool.
But at the same time, as an EMR, you were literally an ambulance driver. Like,
Oh,
that's all
yeah.
you do. Like, I couldn't take patients. I could help load them in the truck. But
Yeah.
that's it. Like, I'm literally a ambulance driver at this point. So that was really cool thing that, ComCare done for me over there. And ComCare, man, they've got a bunch of great people over there.
Mm-hmm.
Really good service. There is sometimes that I miss being over there, but it's still nothing like being at home and, taking care of the people that, you grew up around, the places you grew up around and stuff like that. So Ohio County really got my foot in the door as far as not having to go to a community college. I got to go, EMR straight into EMT. And then I worked over there as an EMT for a while. Even when I started into the paramedic program, not long after I got my EMT actually, I started into the paramedic program and was still with ComCare at that time.
So, did you go from EMT to EMTA and then paramedic?
Yes. So there's a point when you're going through a paramedic program that you meet all the qualifications and criteria that you can test out and go ahead and get your advanced. I wasn't going to do that at the time because I hate taking tests.
Yeah.
And that was a
Me
big
too.
thing. Yeah. It was one of those things like, my end goal is to become a paramedic.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to go and take that extra test just to get my EMTA. Well, my instructor over in Hopkinsville, he said, I really want you to get your A. And I said, I hate taking tests. I don't want to take an extra one. I said, it's just not something. He said, you get that little bit of experience of doing more than an EMT in the back of the truck. And he said, you get to make some of the decisions that's going to prepare you to become a paramedic. I said, I don't think you understand how bad I hate taking tests. He said, I understand that. He was like, but it's going to help you in the long run. And he talked me into it. So I did end up getting my advance before I got my paramedic. I had my advance for about 6 months before I got my paramedic.
Oh, so you went from nothing to
I went
boom, boom, boom.
And that's what a lot of people that I talked to when I was, I went EMR straight into EMT, was an EMT for about 6 months. And everybody was like, oh, you need to be an EMT at least for 6 years before you even consider going to paramedic. And I was like, oh, okay. So I just, and I started talking to people. The older generation was telling me that. They were like, you need at least 6 years.
Yeah.
Well, then the newer generation was like, if you want to become a paramedic, like, go ahead and go now.
Yeah.
And I was like, like I said, when I done construction, those older guys, they were always, the ones that they treated me right. What really convinced me to do it is I had a guy that I was working with that day. He was a nurse. but he also worked the EMS side. He was just an EMT, but he was going through paramedic school. Well, we're on several runs that day, and he started talking to me about it, and he said, man, if you want to go into the paramedic side of things, he said, I suggest doing it.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, this is what they've told me. And he said, I've been a nurse for about 10 years now. He said, want to become a paramedic. And he's like, I'm not too man enough to admit. He said, I'm struggling. And I was like, I figured you would fly by. I said, you're already a nurse. I said, so it's, And he said, I failed the test 4 times already. I was like, what?
Oh, wow.
Yeah. He was like, he said, I failed the test. He said, I'm close to having to retake the course. I said, and this dude's super smart. Like, I mean, he was very intelligent. And that's what really made me kind of nervous. I was like, man, I can't do this then.
Yeah.
And he started telling me, he said, I've been on a truck so long. He said, because he had been an EMT for a long time as well. And he said, I've worked pre-hospital and I've worked hospital. He said, the knowledge that I have, he said, is what's hindering me.
Oh, I can see that.
Yeah. He said, what you do on the street is different than what that test is done. I asked you, and he said, you've got to be a good test taker before you can go out here. And, he said, because the test, trains you, the class trains you to take the test. But then once you get on the streets, it's a whole different thing.
Yeah, that's when you get your training.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that's the first time I'd ever heard the phrase, none of the patients read the book. Mm-hmm. And I was like, what does he mean by that? But that's what held him. He ended up having to retake a whole paramedic program over again because he failed the test. And that's what it was, is he was hindered by the amount of knowledge and the time he had on the job. That's what was holding him back.
I can see that.
So the very next shift, I was working with Jim Duke's son, which is a paramedic.
Yeah.
Very young paramedic. He was a nurse as well. Went and got his paramedic. Was actually in school. He was in PA school to be a physician's assistant. I was like, no pressure on me now. Got a half doctor back here with me. And I was talking to him, and like I said, he was younger. He said, man, do it. He said, he's like, I agree with it 110%. He said, the longer you do it, he said, with the tests they give now, he said, it's actually harder. He said, if this is what you want to do and this is where you want to be full time, he said, go ahead. And he said, go straight for your paramedic. I was like, you don't think it's going to, hinder me any with the amount of experience I have? He said, no. He said, if anything at all, I think you're able to soak up more material and knowledge right now as gung-ho,
Yeah.
as you are right now. Because I was very eager to learn. If they were doing something, I wanted to know why.
Oh, yeah.
And that's what, like I said, when I finally discovered what a paramedic was, is when I got in the back of the truck watching, like I said, I got to work around a lot of great medics over in Ohio County. And it came down to where I wanted to know why they were doing what they were doing, when they were doing it, and I wanted to know the how of everything.
Yeah.
So then it really bothered me that here I am an EMT and I know something needs to be done, and I'm like, we're just on a basic truck that day or something else. I'm like, I know something needs to be done, but I can't do it. Like and so that bothered me, and that's what really lit that fire to, okay, now I want to become a paramedic.
Yeah. That way you can do it.
Yeah. I didn't want to be just watching something when I could actually make the difference. And that guy that I was telling you about, I asked him, I said, what really just, because he just done it part-time. I said, what made you, if you're making $40-something an hour as a nurse, coming over making $12 an hour as an EMT, he said, I love the pre-hospital side of things. He said, I just do it part-time. I said, well, what makes you want to go get your medic then? And he had told me an incident where they were out on a scene. It was an MVA, bunch of kids laying around everywhere. Mm-hmm. Had a kid that had a spleen lack. Ooh. Kid was bleeding out. Pressures were low, couldn't get a radial pulse or anything like that. Here he is, a nurse that can take care of this in the hospital, start IVs, do all the stuff necessary to help this kid in the hospital. In the back of that truck, he couldn't do anything. And he said at that moment, he said, I realized that, I didn't have a paramedic with me to start things. And he said, how can I morally watch this kid bleed out in front of me when I know what to do? And I said, no, I feel the same way. I said, yeah. I know what I want to do. I said, and he said that was the thing that really, really pushed him. And it was just working with a guy that was kind of the same mindset. It really kind of,
Yeah, hungry people cook.
Yeah,
you know
exactly.
What I mean? Like, that's where it comes down to. People that are hungry to get better and stuff.
Yep.
That's why we got such a good thing going here right now. All my guys are hungry, man.
Yeah.
We'll get out there and train all day long.
And that's the bad thing that you see. It's a good thing and a bad thing. Because you've got all these guys coming up, and I know you see it on the fire side, but the EMS side of things, we have a lot of people that just hold a certification. Once they get that paramedic, that's the last time they ever open a book. That's the last time they ever read a case study. That's the last time they do anything. Yeah. And that's how they're going to do it for the next 30 years. Mm-hmm. But you got, like you said, the guys that's hungry, that want to know the why, the how, why this happened this way. It's a really good thing to have in the department, especially when you have other people like that.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the EMS side of things, you don't get that a whole lot. You get a lot of the people that this is how we've done it for 30 years. This is how we're going to do it the rest of the time. Yeah. And if you're not careful, that toxic environment brings everybody. Yeah, you'll see somebody that's real hungry. Yeah. You'll see somebody that's real hungry in there just wanting to go in there, be really good at what they do. Not a cocky attitude, but they want to be proficient in what they do.
Yeah, want to be the best.
And then you'll see them 2 years later and they're like, man, I'm just here to get a check.
Yeah.
Just like everybody else, because it's eventually wore off on them.
Yeah, well, once you get your balloon popped so many times, you stop airing it back up.
And I see that a lot, and I've seen that just since I've been working EMS, is you see a lot of hungry people out there that eventually over the years they just get brought down because there is so many people that just want to hold a title now. That's it. That's all they want. They want to be, I'm a paramedic.
Yeah.
That's what I do. And
well, I think a lot of it too, especially on the EMS side, is you guys are just drugged through the mud.
Oh, yeah.
You know, constantly.
Yeah.
And I mean, calls aren't going down.
No.
The only problem, calls are going up and they're getting more pointless.
Yep.
You know what I mean? Like, and I don't mean that because some people call, they need help, and we love those. You know, we want to go help. You guys want to be there. But then there's sometimes you got somebody bleeding out on one end of the county, and then somebody's got diarrhea on the other end of the county.
Yep. Oh, I've had that. If Troy knew half the conversations I had in the back of that truck with some people, he'd probably hate me. But like you said, there's so many calls for stuff that don't need a name. They don't even need an urgent care.
Yeah.
They need Tylenol. That's literally what they need.
Exactly.
They need Tylenol. They don't need an urgent care, don't need an ER, don't need an ambulance for sure. But me and John was just talking about this last week. We're losing the generation of men that were men. That, these Vietnam vets, all this stuff, I cut my leg off with a chainsaw, drove myself to the hospital, or the guy that had 2 massive heart attacks drove himself to the hospital both times. We don't see that anymore. I'm making calls on 17, 18-year-olds that have a headache, or they have,
and call 911 for it.
Yeah, or they drank too much.
Oh, yeah.
And now they're vomiting, which is, a side effect of being intoxicated.
Yeah.
And here they are. And we're supposed to treat every run's an emergency run. In their eye, that was drilled into my head when I was going through school was, well, in their eyes, that's an emergency. But the more people I'm running on now, and you ask them, my thing that I always ask almost everybody, why did you call 911 today? And a lot of people take that as me being, being a smart ass or whatever. And I'm like, no, I said, what changed today? Like, if your symptoms have been going on, what made you, because there could have been like, I started experiencing severe chest pain. I want to know what pushed them over the edge to call 911 today. And a lot of the answers that I'm getting now from these 18, 19, I didn't want to wait in the waiting room. Well, I didn't want to drive myself there. And I'm like, well, why did you deem this it's not an emergency. I said, you called 911.
Yeah, it's an emergency.
I said, that's an emergency line.
Yeah.
Well, that's the only way I knew. Do y'all have a number? I've even had people call, be like, well, do y'all have a number that I can just call y'all directly to get a ride? And I'm like people literally think we're an Uber.
Yeah, yeah.
And so, like I said, those conversations that we have with people is, especially these younger ones that now, I'll ask, like, you have family that live in this county? Yeah. You got people you love here? Yeah. Okay, so you called me for your headache today, and I'm going to take your headache serious. And then I'll go in and be like, we run 3 trucks in this county. And they don't know where I'm going with it at first, but I'm like, we run 3 trucks in this county. And if one of your loved ones called right now, I said, would you deem your emergency over their cardiac arrest or if they was to have a bad vehicle, accident? And they're like, no. And I'm like, so what if we run up? I said, all 3 trucks are out. I said, imagine if we run up on a wreck right now. It's got a bunch of kids in it, a bunch of people hurt. And he's like, oh, I would get out. And I said, you can't. Yep. I said, that's patient abandonment. I said, I can't let you get out of this truck. I said, even though somebody else's condition might be more serious, I said, because I'm with you and I've made patient contact, I said, I can't abandon you now. I said, that's my license.
Yeah.
Oh, no, something like, if it was one of my family members, I would get out of the truck. And I said, I can't let you abandon. I said,
Yeah,
I can't.
no, you
I
won't.
said, yeah. I said, that's the thing. I said, that's what, and nobody knows that. They think that, hey, I might call for it's harmless.
Yeah.
So we get that a lot more now because friends talk, people talk. We always make this thing of, well, they went by ambulance because you can get more prayers in the back of an ambulance.
Yeah.
Because everybody puts that Facebook post on there. Well, I just went to the hospital in an ambulance. Well, I just had to call an ambulance.
I love the pictures that they take.
The
selfies. Yes.
Right. Well, what would you rate your pain right now? 10 out of 10. As they're back there taking selfies,
Yeah,
I'm like, okay, tell me more about your 10 out of 10 pain right now. But yeah, and it's going to get worse. As time goes on, everybody's like, well, what can fix EMS? And everybody's come together to try to fix EMS, but it's just like the fire service. When you have a problem, it's not something that you can just shut down for a month, fix the problem.
Yeah.
It's like trying to change a tire while you're driving down the road. You can't do it.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things that you just can make slight improvements.
Yeah.
But
and it takes years.
Exactly. And with the way things are going now, it's gotten so bad that it's just going to progressively get worse. It's not going to get any better. It's just going to progressively get worse. So you can either adapt to it and figure out how to make it better, or you can just let it run you into the ground.
Yeah. So how long were you with ComCare?
I was with ComCare for just a little over 2 years.
So when did you decide to come to Muhlenberg?
So I was actually in the paramedic program at the time, and Mike Cornett was my instructor. Man is crazy smart. Like, he should be a doctor. I actually think he was going to challenge the boards to get his MD.
Oh, wow.
He's stupid smart. He worked here in Muhlenberg County for a while, worked in Hopkinsville, worked all over the place. And he kept asking me, he said, man, why don't you work in Muhlenberg County? I said, no. I said, ComCare was nice to me. I said, they're putting me through school right now. They put me through all the other stuff that I needed to get. And he said, I understand that. He said, but you can go there PRN. He said, Muhlenberg County. I said, nah. I said, I don't know. I said, He said, it's a different feeling taking care of the people that's in your community. He said, not only that, he said, out of all the places I've worked, he said, Muhlenberg County gets some of the craziest stuff. And I said, there ain't no way. I said, I've lived there my whole life. He said, it's different working on the EMS side of things than just living there. He said, you will see some crazy stuff there. And he said, it will. He said, it'll build you up better. He said, the more experience you have with, seeing some of the crazier things, he said, the better provider you're going to be. And I started talking to some people, and ComCare's not a fan of Muhlenberg County. They're just not. I heard a lot of negative things, but I'm also one of those people that I have to experience it. There's somebody's always going to have a negative thing to say about something, no matter if it's the best thing in the world.
Oh, yeah.
There's always going to be. I always have to experience it firsthand. So I did. I put my application in down here at Muhlenberg County. Didn't get hired the first time, actually. And then they opened up that second position a couple months later. And I remember, as soon as I put my application in, the day I put it in, I went and talked to Troy. And then the next day I called him. After I talked to him in person, then I called him the next day. I said, you gonna be hiring anytime soon?
Yeah.
I said, I just came in and talked.
Yeah,
and he was like, he's like, I just talked to you yesterday. I was like, I know. Well, then, I'd give it a couple days calling back.
Yeah.
And finally he asked me, he said, I've talked to you. And I said, I was always told the squeaky wheel gets the grease.
That's
I said,
the
I just
truth.
wanted to make sure that you knew I was interested.
Yeah.
And I ended up getting hired down here PRN. But it was because I didn't really have any interest in it at first, just because I didn't want to do that to ComCare. But Mike Cornett, my instructor over at Hopkinsville, he talked me into it. He was like, man, he said, it's just one of those things. He said, I loved it in Muhlenberg County. He said, they've got a lot of great providers down there. He said, it's just the stuff you see. And I was like, I still couldn't believe it. I was like, it's Muhlenberg County.
Yeah, it ain't that wild.
Yeah. So that's what pushed me to come to Muhlenberg. If it wouldn't have been for Mike, I honestly don't know, because you have that double-edged sword there. Yeah, you're taking care of your community, which is good. That you're also taking care of your community, which is bad, because it's the people the people you grew up around, all that stuff. So it's a double-edged sword that you've got to be very careful on. Ohio County, man, I didn't even know my way to Walmart almost, so I didn't know anybody in Ohio County. All these people that we were running on, the fatalities we seen, all this other stuff, I'm like, oh, okay, like, I don't know this guy. I don't know this woman. Like, I didn't know him.
Yeah.
It's different when you work in the community that you live in.
Yeah, because, especially like Muhlenberg County, almost everybody, even if you don't know them, they're familiar.
Yeah.
You know?
You've either ran into them at Walmart. They've held the door open for you somewhere.
Exactly.
Like, there's so many people that I see, I'm like, I know him from somewhere.
Yep.
And I can't figure out. And then later on, I either worked with him or ran into him at Walmart, and I can talk to anybody. I can literally have a conversation. My wife hates it, but I can literally go up and talk to anybody. Like, we'll find something to talk about. It might be stupid, but we're going to talk about it.
Yeah, it's because it's job. You got to do. You got to. You meet strangers every day, and by the time they get out of that truck, for the rest of their life, they're like, I can't remember that guy's name, but he was pretty cool.
Well, there's a lady that works at Walmart, and I am very recognizable just due to the tattoos. Yeah. So a lot of people, they see me and they're like, well, I remember you because of my tattoos. But there is a lady, every time she sees me in Walmart, and this is before I became a paramedic, I was going through clinicals at the ER. And the hospital was having a really tough time getting an IV started on her. And I go in there, and I remember talking to her, and I did. I never even got the IV on her. I think I stuck her 3 times. And every time I see her to this day in Walmart, she was like, I just want to let you know. She was like, you were the nicest person that I've ever talked to in the hospital. She's like, I remember you sticking me several times. She said, but I tell everybody on how nice you were and how bad you felt for, having to get. I was like, yeah. And that's what she, and I went through her line several times, and she remembers me to this day. She couldn't tell you my name to save her life. And she's never asked it. She was like, I just remember you from, your face. She's like, I remember how nice you were. And she was like, and your tattoos give you away. And I said, that's my downfall. I said, I can't hide in a crowd usually.
Yeah, exactly. So, do you remember your very first serious call as an EMT before paramedic before?
Oh, 110%. It was working with, like I said, Jim Duke's son, which he was in school to be a physician's assistant at that time. So I had like a half doctor with me. But that day I had just been released to work as an EMT. And that day there was some lift assist, had just a couple small things from the nursing home. Ohio County, you didn't have the run volume like you have over here in Muhlenberg County. So we had maybe run 2-3 runs that day. It was later in the evening.
Oh, wow, that's slow.
Yeah, we get called out to the nursing home for a fall. And it was almost like an assisted living center. They're not allowed to, it was a weird thing. They wouldn't allow to help a patient up if they fell because there could be an injury and all that. They didn't have any nurses or any staff like that. It was just pretty much a bunch of aides. And there was a liability thing, and I forgot how they explained it to me. But if a patient falls, EMS had to come because that patient could have broke something. They could have been, had a bleed or anything could have happened. So we always went out there for lift assist. So we went out there, and I remember here's this 90-year-old lady in the bathroom floor. Just your sweet grandma that you always think of. And I've always been really good at talking to people.
Yeah.
And so I got down there, and I said, why are you laying here for? I said, you got a bed over there? And she instantly started joking and laughing with me. We helped her up, and, she was just, we were heroes at that moment in her eyes. Like, she was, like, so thankful for us. Yeah. And, we were joking, cutting up. And we even stood there and talked to her for, like, an extra 10 minutes. Like I said, Ohio County, you wasn't really in a rush, We had runs, but nothing like here. So, we're joking, cutting up, and we're walking back to the truck, and we get to the front door, and they page out a difficulty breathing. And I think he was 36 years old. 9 times out of 10, when it's a 20 and 30, you're like, okay, anxiety, they've been drinking, and you've seen it all. Or it could be drug related. You just don't know.
Yeah.
So, Ohio County, you ran everything lights and sirens. I don't care if it was a stub toe, whatever it was an emergency.
Yeah.
That's how they drilled into your head. It was an emergency. You were running lights and sirens. So, here we are running. But in Ohio County, it's a very rural service just like here. It could take you 35, 40 minutes to get to the other side of the county where this house was. And it was one of those situations where it was about a 25 to 30 minute window before we got there. Even running lights and sirens, it still took us a while to get there. And here's, this was going to be my first ever, difficulty breathing, even though it was mid-30s. I was like, it's still going to be something more than just a nursing home run or a lift assist.
Yeah.
So we're like 10 minutes into the call, and dispatch is like, hey, the family's called wanting to know an ETA. And we tell them, we're still like 20 minutes out. So that was it. Keep going. About 5 minutes went by. Family's called back wanting to know an ETA now.
And this might be serious.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, Seth told me, he said, we get this a lot. He said, what it is, he said, I just want to prepare you. He said, when we walk in, He said they're going to be very frantic.
Oh, yeah.
He said with them calling, he said anybody calls and wants an ETA, he said you're going to run into, he said somebody's going to be frantic when you walk through that door. He said more than likely their whole family, cousin, mom, dad, brother-in-law from California is going to be there. He said they've done invited everybody over. He's like, so just prepare yourself for when you walk through that door. So we get there, and of course, there's 5 family members that meet us on the front porch. And they're like, hey, he's, really having trouble breathing, blah, blah, blah. Seth's like, yeah, we're going to get in here, take care of him. We're going to see what's going on. Go in there. Had a pulse ox in my pocket, threw it on his finger. He was sat in 99% room air. Said he's been having difficulty breathing for last 3 days, and that it's just progressively got worse, and he just don't feel like he can breathe today. And COVID was still very present and everything going on. We're like, and this man's got the flu, he's got COVID, he's got something. And the porch that we walked up on wasn't in very great condition. Yeah. We almost fell through it walking across it the first time. So we asked him. We were like, hey, man, if we walk you to the front door, you think you can make it? He said, oh, yeah. He said, I can make it. We were like, we just want to walk you down these steps, but we don't think we can put the stretcher on the front porch. He said, yeah, I can make it. So we stand him up. Seth, he starts to go get the stretcher out of the back of the truck, get it down to the bottom of the steps. We're walking. We get halfway to the front door. At this time, we're in the living room. He said, I can't. He said, I can't walk no more. I said, well, you think if I let you sit down for a second, we can make it the rest of the way? He said, maybe. I said, okay. He said, I don't think, you always hear that, like when the patient tells you they're about to die, it's never a good sign.
Yeah.
But he was young.
Yeah,
and
no, you're not. Yeah. Just calm down.
Yeah. I was like, okay. I said, we'll set you here. I said, if you feel like you can walk the rest of the way, I said, we'll do it here in a second. Set him down on the couch. I sat there with him for a second. He said, I can't walk the rest of the way. He said, y'all are going to have to come in here and get me. I was like, all right. I said, I'll go tell him. I said, we'll get in here. He said, I just feel like I'm about to die. I said, we're going to get you taken care of. Yep. I remember making it to the front door, and I heard, you always hear of agonal respirations in class, but you can never really understand until you hear them for the first time. I was like, man, what was that noise? I looked over, and I'm like, he don't look too good. I said, this ain't good. Well, then he slumped over. He fell over. I remember hollering at Seth. I was like, hey, I said, I think something's real wrong in here. I said, you might want to hurry up. He said, what? I go over there. Guy don't have a pulse. Yeah.
Full code.
Yeah, full code at that moment. Pull him off of the couch. Seth gets in there. He's like, what happened? I was like, he said he didn't feel good. And so he felt like he was about to die. And we sat down here, and I said, well, he died. I said, So we start CPR on him, and like I said, that was one of those situations where the whole entire family was there.
Oh, yeah.
I'm talking wife, mom, dad, sister.
And that's the worst part.
Oh, yeah, it was horrible. And I remember Seth, he told me, he said, go to the truck. Well, he said, run to the truck and tell them we have a code blue and to send additional help. Because out there, you didn't get a whole lot of fire department response in these rural places. Mm-hmm. So a lot of time, an extra unit would back you up if it was something serious. Well, I remember hollering that on the radio, and then he was like, well, I need this out of the truck. Well, then I ran back. And then I get back in there, and he's like, oh, well, we need this too. So I grabbed that. And at that time, I remember coming up the steps. I understand now why you don't run. And when he said run to the truck, he didn't physically mean run.
Yeah.
I ran. And I was coming up the steps, and I remember seeing the black dots. Like, everything started getting spinny. I was like, I'm going to go down. I said, I'm going to pass out right now. Yeah. This is it. And I remember going back in the house, and we're working this code, and here I am, like, almost about to need to be worked myself.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to do stuff, and I'm like, probably looking back, everybody was probably thinking, like, oh, he is so nervous right now. Yeah. No, I was about to go out. Like, I was really seeing black dots. It was bad.
Yeah. Adrenaline pumping like crazy.
Yes. And I remember, here we are down there. We kept swapping out compressions. Well, Seth, at this time, he said, we're going to, I'm going to let you take over compressions. He said, I'm going to start intubating him. He said, I've got the line, all this other stuff. He said, we're going to start working this a little bit more aggressively now. So the wife was like, and 9 times out of 10, you don't want any family member helping you.
Oh, no.
But because of where we were limited at the time, she said, oh, I'm a nurse, blah, 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 I can help. You hear that a lot from nurses now.
Yeah.
And now I'm just like, hey, just go stand over here for a second.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Stand there.
Yeah, just don't open that door.
Yeah.
So Seth is like, if you feel comfortable, I'm going to have you swap over. Because I'd been going for like 5 minutes on compressions while he's doing everything else. He's like, I'm going to have you take over. Well, she took over and done them for about 30 seconds. She's like, I can't do it. So here I go back to it. Well, I'm over here, and she's like praying over top of me, like got her hand on, like it. Take in mind, the whole family's still there.
Oh, yeah.
So they're like praying over top of me. Like at one point, I felt somebody's hand on my head.
Yeah.
And I was like, man, I said, this is wild.
Yeah, no, you just keep working.
And the next thing I know, their hand is on my shoulder cussing me. Like, I mean, literally physically screaming, cussing at me.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, this is different. And then they would go back to praying over top of me.
Yeah.
And then back to the cut. And then the wife projectile vomited all over me. Like, I mean, covered me from shoulder to ankles. Whew. And I was like, well, this is great.
Yeah, you're still working.
Yeah, never missed a beat. Yep.
Yeah, you never stop.
And she was like, I am so... And then here she goes again. I said, if you don't care, I said, just aim it that way.
Yeah.
Because she is still trying to talk to me, projectile vomiting on me. And I remember the additional crew finally got there, what felt like decades. I know what people, when they call and it's an actual emergency, we do sometimes get that feeling of what it takes for an additional unit to get there, because it seems like an eternity for somebody to get there. And I remember I told the crew that I said, y'all looked like the most beautiful woman I've ever seen walking across that yard when y'all got there. I said, y'all were beautiful.
Yeah.
Because when I seen them, I knew I was going to get a break for a second. And they came in, and we're still working this guy. And in Ohio County, you never called anybody in the field. It was always the hospital done it. So we get this guy loaded up, fall through the porch. Stretcher almost falls through the porch. It was a nightmare.
Covered in puke.
Yeah, covered in puke.
Yeah.
Just, I mean, one of those situations where I'm wet from head to toe, not only in vomit, but sweat. Still feel like I'm going to pass out. Haven't got a break. Making sure I have everything, because this is my first serious call. I was like, I'm going to lose my job if I forget anything or anything crazy like that. So I'm just still trying to make sure I'm doing everything the right way. Get him in the back of the truck. Here I am, AMT at this time. The medic... Seth, he was like, you're going to drive us in. He said, run lights and sirens. Don't kill us. He said, don't. He said, I want a smooth ride. Well, the other medic from the other truck, he jumped in. They worked this guy the entire way to the hospital and get in there. Hospital calls it. We get out the truck, and Seth was like, is there anything you want to talk about? He said, was that your first? And I said, man, he was young. That was the first thing out of my mouth. I said, he was young. And he said, yeah. He said, that's the thing, and that's what stuck with me. He said, death's not greedy. He said, it don't matter if you're a minute old or you're 103. He said, it's not greedy. And I said, I see that now. I said, I would have never imagined somebody, ended up, guy had trouble breathing because he was full of fluid. He had CHF, never informed us, had a bad heart, never informed us of any of that. He just said he chalked it up as COVID. Everybody had COVID.
Yeah.
So that's
right
what
in the middle of it.
Yep, that's what he thought. So he didn't think anything about his CHF or anything like that. But that's what it ended up being. And I was like, man, you take every call serious. Some of them, once you get there, you can lower your guard down a little bit. You always have that high suspicion index, but you can lower your guard a little bit sometimes. But after seeing that, I was like, I'm going to go back to building houses.
Yeah, what have I gotten into?
Yeah, I was like, what is this? Because here I am, covered in sweat and vomit. Guy went from being literally a hero to this 90-year-old lady to getting cussed at, puked on, and now I just let some kid's daddy die.
Yeah.
And some husband, some son, like how I went from the highest of high to the lowest of low.
Yeah.
In minutes. Like, I mean, literally in minutes. Like, it one run changed from the next. But that's also, as soon as that happened, I contemplated it that night. I went home and I was like, I don't have to do this. I said, I can go back to, when I came over to do this, I took about a $40,000 to $50,000 pay cut a year.
Yeah.
And I said, I can go back to making money. I said, I don't have to do this. But I started thinking, where I went from, one extreme to the next, that's what stuck me right there. I was like, it was that adrenaline. It was that, you get the adrenaline dump with it, but you never know what something's going to turn into. So my first serious call almost ended up in me leaving completely.
Yeah.
But it also grabbed me. It was like, this is what this job is about. This is, you never know what that next call is going to be.
Yeah.
And sometimes you get complacent. Like, you'll run a bunch of minor stuff for 2 or 3 shifts. And next thing you know, it might be a plane crash, a shoot. You never know what the next one's going to be. And it gets addicting almost. I think there's something wrong with us a little bit.
Oh, yeah.
Because we do
For sure.
What most people scream over and cry and all this other stuff are like, oh yeah, like we're going to do this right now.
Yeah. I hope we catch that one.
Like I'm trying to finish the rest of my burrito or something before we get there. You know, just trying to choke something down.
Yeah.
But that's what it really sealed at that time, that first call.
You go from being a hero with grandma to, like you said, somebody's dad dying right there, being a piece of crap.
Yep. Oh, and the family let us know too. They
sure.
definitely was very, we could have done this different. We could have done that different. Everybody, was telling us. And that's what he told me. He said, you've got to take it with a grain of salt. He said, we done our jobs, what we're supposed to do. He said, you've got to understand they just lost somebody that they didn't think they were going to lose for a very long time.
And they got to blame somebody.
Yep. They've got to have that. He said, it's part of, and you read it in the books. When you're going through class, that whole, thing of everybody reacts different to death.
Yeah.
And that's what he told me. He said, not everybody. He said, this is the first one that's ever blamed me. He said, but most of the people we work are 80, 90 years old, or they've got terminal cancer or something. He said, they expect it. Nobody expected this guy to, he said, I didn't. He said, I thought it was COVID.
Yeah.
He said, that's what we all suspected. He said, but it's one of those things. He said, death's not greedy. We've just got to take it as we go, do the best we can, and let the family grieve however they need to.
Yeah.
And, like I said, I did. I went home that night, thought about it. I probably didn't sleep an hour that night. Yeah. But I got up the next morning, went back and did the same thing all over again.
Yeah, and I think that's something that most people don't talk about, what this job requires from you.
Yeah.
You got to be hero, and you got to be okay with being villain.
Yep.
Even if you're not villain, you can blame me. I get it. It sucks. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And
that's how you've got to have very tough skin to do this job.
Oh, yeah.
And not just with the stuff you see, with what you're going to get. Because like you said, people have to have a villain sometimes. And sometimes you've got to be that guy. Even though you didn't do anything wrong, you've just got to let them take their not so much aggression out on you, but let them vent.
Yeah.
To make them feel better. And, because they did, one of their loved ones just died. Just for instance, last week I had a family, it was actually the daughter, get crazy angry at me. But it's because I had to have that real life talk with her. I was like, I understand that you're upset. I said, I can't say anything here to make you feel better.
Yeah.
I said, and nothing's going to make you feel better. I said, but I'm bringing it to you from a real world perspective. And I said, I know that's not my loved one in there in that bed. I said, but I'm going to talk to you like a human. Yeah. And I said, and you can react as a human. I said, however you need to.
Yeah.
And at the end of that she went from yelling at me. She said, I get what you're saying now. And she said, nobody's ever broke it down to me that way. Yeah. And that's the conversations that, it changes. They go from hating you to, okay, I see what you mean now.
Yeah.
I didn't know what you meant by that. And
if you didn't know, the station's haunted as all get out.
I like it. I'm here for
I
it.
mean, you just seen that, dude.
Yeah.
The door just opened for anybody listening.
I'm supposed to work tomorrow, so if something happens to me before then, that's fine.
That's wild. There's stuff happens all the time. So, no, I mean, and I think that matters a lot too when you actually take time to speak with the family, because if somebody's dead, it sounds kind of cold because we just talk about death like it's Sunday chicken, you know. And I hate this.
This worked the most traumatic thing you've ever seen in your life, and then we're sitting up here eating Chinese.
Yeah, man, their legs were tore off.
Yeah,
and they're like, what?
Yeah, traumatic cardiac arrest due to car accident, and we're like, want to go grab some food real quick?
Yeah, and I'm sure we sound like that because I've said stuff before and the whole room get quiet.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, man.
Yeah, you really got to watch where you're at. Sometimes I'm like, I'm going to end up on a grippy sock vacation. Yeah. Somebody's going to put me in a hospital.
Yeah, exactly. But, like you said, I think it matters when you take time with the family because, like I was saying, the patient's gone. There's nothing you can do, but you still got to deal with them.
Yep.
And it matters taking time to try to at least explain a little bit what you can.
And that, like I said, I have a gift of being able to talk to people that most people can't talk to. If Troy seen how I talk to some people, he'd probably fire me. But I had this conversation again a couple months ago. I said, you've got to walk in and base all of your stuff off of a 30-second impression.
Yeah.
I've walked in people's houses and they've been glad to see me. I've walked in there, they've been screaming, cussing. And I've even had transfers where I've walked up there to the hospital and they're like, man, he's going to give you a hard time. He's going to, and then within our first 30 seconds, he's acting like my best friend. They're like, how'd you do that? And I'm like, you got to talk to everybody different.
Yeah.
I said, everybody, and I said, I've got to try. And I said, I can't do it all the time. I said, but so far, I said, I'm really good at picking up on how different people react to how you react.
Yes.
And it's one of those things that you got to pick up on, walk in a house and somebody's screaming at you. So here you are raising your voice back. And then all of a sudden they're like, okay, we're going to calm down. Like, this is fine.
Yeah.
I'm like, this is all we need. Like if you're going to talk crazy and they're like, why are you yelling? I'm like, well, you're yelling at me.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that.
And there's really nothing that can train you for that. Just experience.
No.
You know, that's it.
Yeah, just walking in and just, like you said, experience.
So honest to God, I had a list of stuff to keep us moving, but we've already went through everything, just talking. So that's been pretty good. But a few things I have before we get done here is, what do you think EMS has taught you about people mostly?
That, in which you always know this, no two people is the same. Everybody has their own different personality. Everybody has how they react to things different. Every patient presents differently. Even though it might be the same thing going on with the same two patients, they're both going to present differently. How they talk to you, how everybody. And I think that was the hardest thing for me when I came into EMS, was seeing, don't get me wrong, I love how different everything that we see goes, but at the same time, you've got to learn how to adapt to that and how people process death. Mm-hmm. It throws me, it's still to this day, even though I see it all the time, it still throws me for a loop. I've had people, like you said, scream, cry, vomit, blame me. And then I've had people that, I'm like, oh man, I forgot my paper in there. Like while I'm waiting for the coroner to get there. And I'm like, oh, I'm going to have to go bother this wife again because I need my stuff off the table. And I'll go and knock on the door and, she pauses her TV show to get up and come let me in. And I go in, here her husband is laying dead in the floor next to her and she's watching, her TV show on TV. And as soon as I walk out, she hits play again. Yeah. And I'm like, man, that's just wild. But then everybody's different. Everybody handles grief differently. And when you talk to people about that, they're like, oh, that sounds fishy. And I'm like, no, I said, it's how people are. I said, they just react differently to different things in life. I said, some people mourn different ways. Mm-hmm. I said, she might have a mental breakdown tomorrow. I said, I don't know. And then also letting people, we're supposed to save people. Mm-hmm. But there's a part of the job where you've got to let somebody die that you don't want to let die. They all have that final decision. Everybody, as long as they can answer every question and they're fully competent in making that decision, they're allowed to refuse medical care. Yeah. And they'll tell you, like, I'm going to die if I refuse. And I'll tell them, like, 100% you're going to die. Yeah. And they'll say, I'm going to die in my house. Yeah. I'm like, man, just let me take you and maybe we can, no. And you've got to, it's nothing, it never gets easier, but it's that last little bit, like these older people that know they will die if you leave them. Mm-hmm. But they're going to go out on their terms. And that's, I still kind of look at it as like that's their last little bit of control over what they have. No, I don't want this guy to die. It's my job to help. I see that you're having trouble breathing. Let me help you. I see that your blood pressure's low. Let me help. Nope, I don't want nothing. And you have to come to the realization that everybody has that last little bit of say-so. And like I said, it never gets easier. You still want to help somebody, but you've also got to be okay with death. Yeah. It's just one of those things. It comes for all of us. Mm-hmm. So you've just got to get comfortable with it and, realize that you can't save everybody. It's not one of those things that, not a hero complex or anything like that, but you just can't help everybody. Yeah. Some people don't want it and they're okay with that. Mm-hmm. And that, and that's also one of the things that I preach to families. I'm like, CPR was never intended for Meemaw. I said CPR was intended for a healthy individual. Yeah. I said, so when you've got a 93-year-old laying there and you want a full code, that's not good for anybody. Yeah. Meemaw don't want that. No. You want it. And that's what the family last week, when I told her, I said, you really need diagnosed with terminal cancer, laying there, kidneys have already fully shut down, terminal cancer, all this other stuff. A guy maybe weighed 90 to 100 pounds. And I told her, I said, is he a full code? oh, yeah. So let me talk to you about that for a second. Because the hospital, they don't do a good job of talking to families and stuff like that. And I said, you do know that if we come out here and he is a full code, we will have to work. She said, well, that's what I want. And I said, what does he want? She said, well, I don't know. She said, but I don't want him to die. And I said, I get that. I said, I do. I said, I can't say that I get that from the way you're looking at it now. I said, but nobody wants a family member to die.
Yeah.
And
Honey, he's dying already.
yeah, and that's what and she said, yeah, but I want, if there's any chance that we can give him one more day. And I said, you really need to have this conversation with him.
Yeah.
I said, because the way this works, I said, if he does end up, arresting him, well, you come out here and work him. I said, there's a difference between being, clinically and physically dead. I said, I've seen it. I said, we've got people back. And on a monitor, you can look, they got a heartbeat. I said, but they're brain dead. I said, they'll never be alive another day. I said, they'll never come off a machine. I said, then the family member has to make that choice. Do we pull the plug? And I said, I think that's harder. I said, I've never went through it. I said, but I've talked to a lot of people that's had to do it because I do a lot of patient follow-ups. I try to stay in touch, figure out what happened because it helps me on cases that I don't know what may be going on. I'm like, oh, well, this worked before or this, And I told her, I said, a lot of times those family members are like, I wish they would have just went ahead and went. And that's what I explained to her. I said, sudden death is sometimes the best blessing that you can get.
Yeah.
I said, no long, drawn-out suffering. I said, he's going to die. And that's when she started yelling. I said, he's going to die. And before I could even finish it, she started. And I said, all of us are going to die. I said, every single one of us. I said, but would you rather go out suffering or would you rather it be quick and just like you never knew about? And she said, well, obviously quick. And I said, sometimes that's a blessing when we don't know it's a blessing. I said, I understand that your loved one. I said, but in the event that he does pass in his sleep and then you find him and we try to work him, I said, what's better? I said, him dying, over the cancer, long drawn out, or in his sleep. And she said, I need to talk to the hospital. She said, that is one of the things I need to talk to him about. And she's like, nobody's ever broke it down to me that way. Yeah. And I was like, yeah. I said, I understand. I said, I get. She was like, I'm so sorry for yelling. I said, no. I said, yell. Do whatever you need to make you feel better. I said, I'm not. I said, right now, this is your emergency, not mine. I said, you do whatever you need to make yourself feel better.
Yeah.
So it's just one of those things.
Yeah. And you're right. Like, death is not the worst thing that can happen.
No. I used to think, I was like, man, death, like, that's it. That's the worst thing. I always used to say, the worst thing that could happen to me is I could die. Once I get over that, it's only uphill from there. Yeah. No, far from the truth. Before I got in this, I used to say it all the time. There is so many things out there that's worse than death. And if you tell somebody that it's not in this, that don't see it, they're like, no, death is the worst. I'm like, no, there's not. I said, there has been several people that, they would rather perish than to live how they live now. Yeah. And
I don't think a lot of families realize how violent CPR is.
Oh, yeah.
We get people back with it, but
vomit,
we break
blood.
them all to pieces to do it.
Yeah. Not only is, like you said, you're cracking the sternum, all this other stuff. But the amount of vomit that you get, the blood, the feces, like nobody understands that until they have worked an arrest before. And it's not a pretty thing. Like I said, if you look it up, if you do your research on it, CPR was intended for a healthy individual. Yeah. Electrocutions or, sudden events to where this younger individual has suffered a cardiac arrest. Like, let's try to give him every... Yeah. But almost once you get to a certain age, it's almost like cruel punishment.
Yeah, because if you do bring them back, they're never going to be the same.
Yeah, and we see it all the time, people that's got dementia in their 90s, like full codes, and I'm like, man, there's got to be somebody out there that you can talk to and explain this stuff to. And 9 times out of 10, when I talk to the families, they're like, well, nobody's ever broke it down that way. Nobody's ever explained that. They think they see it on TV.
Yep. They're like, it's the be-all, cure-all.
Yep. Well, if they get them back, they'll be sitting up in the bed watching Andy Griffin, this time tomorrow. Yeah. And that's just not the reality. It happens sometimes. Yeah. But it's just not the reality that we live in.
Yeah, it don't happen sometimes for Meemaw.
Yep. And that's the thing is once you go down in cardiac arrest, every minute you're down, you lose. I think studies now, they're saying, that once a person is down, you can do hands-only CPR for 8 minutes. They have enough blood or enough oxygen in their bloodstream to suffice for 8 minutes as long as good, high-quality CPR is being done. Anything after 8 minutes, they are losing brain cells. They are losing, I think now they're saying like 15, 20 minutes of after being that. Like that person's not going to have any. Now, that's warm. That's
Yeah.
a witnessed arrest. You know, they're warm,
Yeah.
all this other stuff. Cold's a completely different story. But, you know, if it's a witnessed arrest and they're warm, after 20 minutes, I mean, you're looking at somebody that you're going to get back that's brain dead.
Yeah.
I can give this table almost enough epi to make it almost have a heartbeat.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just one of those things.
For real.
And that's what, you know, they see that little squiggly line up there, and it's better than a flat line.
Yeah.
And that's another thing. Everybody's like, well, shock them. And I'm like, that's not how this works.
Yeah.
Like, they see you shock somebody, they're back alive. Yeah. And I'm like, that's not how this works.
That's TV stuff.
Yep.
Yeah. Man. Well, Tyler, that's pretty much all I got, man. I appreciate you coming and doing this today. I think it was a really
appreciate you
good
having
one.
me.
I was excited to get an EMS perspective from it. So
Yeah, you probably won't have any more after me.
maybe
you'll be
I've
like,
messaged a couple of them. So.
you'll be like, oh, no, we ain't doing this no more. It's
No,
bad.
no, I liked it. I liked it. I'd like to get a couple cops too. I haven't had a police officer yet, so
I got you.
I'm looking at getting some of those. But man, thanks. You got anything else that you want to say?
No. I think
Anything you don't think we've covered that you'd like to?
No, I think we've covered just about everything.
Well, okay, then I think we're good.
All right.
All right, man. Appreciate it.